Okay, welcome back. So last time we created a couple functions. One of them, compare nodes, just prints names of materials. This cycle through materials, though, this is where we learned what was called a while loop, which let us look at every material on a figure and then perform some operation on that. In this case, calling our compare nodes function that right now just prints the name of the material. So if that doesn't sound clear, let's go back and refresh some poser terminology here because this is going to matter for the next thing we're going to do. So in poser again, we have our figures. We have a lot of figures here that I've loaded into the scene. We then also have a whole bunch of materials on that figure. And so if I change to a different figure, it's going to have a different set of materials. So that was what this while loop did, is it took the figure we had and it gave us those materials. But now I want to do something to that material. Well, we sort of can't access the material directly. If we just try to use this material variable we got, we can give the name of the material, and there are things you can do here, but we're not going to be able to get to our nodes directly. We need to first get to something called a shader tree. Now, I'm going to be honest, there is the possibility as I look through Poser's documentation that you could have multiple shader trees. The reason I say that is there are some functions here for getting the materials layers shader tree. We're not going to worry about that. That is beyond my material room knowledge. I'm perfectly happy to admit that. For the most part, the shader tree is really going to equal what you have in this advanced tab of the material room. It's easy to think of it as being this guy here. This is really the first node on our shader tree. But basically, everything encapsulated in this window for our purposes is going to be that shader tree. So that's where we're going to be able to look at and deal with these things in here. So that being said, we need to get to that shader tree. So we're going to declare a variable called tree. And it is going to be, we're going to go to material shader tree. So this is again one of our built-in functions in PoserPython. It's one of the things we're getting from this library we've imported. And it takes a material and it returns the shader tree. So we have a tree. That's great. Now, what are we going to do with that tree? Well, the tree, because the tree basically equals all of this, we really can just look through the nodes here. And there's a couple ways of doing this. In this particular case, we're going to do it with what's called a for loop. So we could do it with a while loop, and we'll talk about later why we're not going to do that. In fact, in my very first version, I was just happy with while loops and I did it that way, and then it was pointed out to me there's definitely a better way to do this, so we're going to use a for loop. And it's good to learn about for loops because they are very useful. So that is a for loop, not a for loop, and it begins with the word for. So I'm going to write this a few lines here and then we're going to talk about what they mean. So we're going to say for n in tree.node, and we need another one of these, and we're going to say print print n.name. So we're going to talk about a couple things here. And actually, you know what? I was intentionally leaving an error node instead of nodes. I'm not going to do that for the moment. So for n in tree.nodes. What this means is n here is a variable, and similar to we're just using one character because this is our index to this while loop. N is similar to an index. We're telling we're telling Python that in this tree.nodes, we're expecting there to be a lot of stuff. We're not even really telling it what kind of stuff, but we're expecting to get a list here. And in this list, we want to look at every item. So this loop is every time we have an item, it's going to do this. So I'm going to save and we will see how this runs. And okay, so it runs and it gives us a lot of information. So index is 0, poser surface, image map 2, ambient occlusion, color map, blend, and clay. So it's listing out for us, just like we wanted, all of these various nodes. So I will point out this, we did this index printing before. I don't think we need that anymore. I'm just going to comment it out for the moment. Then down here, we've been printing the material name. I'm going to add a line here to make this a little better to read. I'm going to say on material, I'm going to say these are the nodes on material. There we go. So that should make things a little bit more readable. And what we could also do to make things a little more readable, just so you know, this isn't really vital, but we can do an empty print statement. Now, the nice thing about this is going to show us something about our for loop, because this print statement is only going to happen, and this is basically printing an empty line, is only going to happen after we've looked at every single node in our tree. So if we go back here and we run our script now, the difference is going to be, so these are the nodes on material corset laces, and here are our nodes. And then we get this carriage return. So while we were looking at our nodes, we don't get that carriage return, or that empty print line is really what it is. It's just a way of doing that. We are going to be able to print that out, but it's not going to happen while we're in this loop. It's only going to happen when we're out of the loop. So now, at this point, I do want to go back because I said I was going to make an error and then I didn't. And this is actually one of the reasons, possibly, I don't know. This is one of the reasons it can be tricky with these for loops, because if we do for n in tree.node, what's going to happen is if we run this script, we're going to get an error, and it's a good error to get in a sense. It tells us usage, shader node type node, int type I, and it says error parsing node. And this is kind of confusing, but here's what's happened, is if we go back and if we look at our shader tree, our shader node, oh no, shader tree methods. So here we are in our poser documentation. We're going to notice that there's two different, very similar functions we can call. Node, and it tells us this gets the node number I in this shader tree, and that's why we got this error. It's expecting for us to have some sort of letter in here. Now we could use a while loop and iterate through, and if we were using a while loop, that would be the correct way to go through. But in this case, we want a list. We want to use nodes, because if we do a shader tree and we do dot nodes, it's going to return a list of nodes. And that's what lets us use this for loop. You can't use a for loop on just anything. You can only use it on certain things. So lists are one of those things. Another thing is strings. We're going to use that later. And if you recall, a string is a string of characters. It's going to be a string of text. And this is one of those things you need to be very aware of in Python. In a lot of languages, when you're first learning them, they're going to spend time teaching you about variable types and object types. And it's a really important concept. It's just a little harder to talk about in Python, because in other languages, if I want a number, I can't just say I equals 0. I need to say int I equals 0. Now you notice this did come in blue. I could do this in Python, but Python really doesn't want me to do this. And when we're writing in Python, we shouldn't do things that way. Similarly, for text, in other languages, I would have to write something like string name equals my name, or something like that. So in a lot of languages, you always have to declare the type of the object you're using. You don't have to do that in Python, and that can make things easier in a lot of cases. For instance, in our for statement, we don't have to worry about what type n is. We don't know what n is. N is just a thing in this list. It does matter that tree.nodes is a list. That's why tree.node without the s on the end doesn't work. But we don't need to really know exactly. We don't have to bother declaring exactly what is in this list. And that can be a very good thing, and it can be a bad thing in certain cases. We probably won't run into any of those cases because of the way PoserPython is written. So right now we've made it so we can print out the names of all of the nodes in our shaders, or in our shader tree on our materials. And next time we're going to go through and we're going to add just a few lines of code, but they're important ones so that we can actually step through our code and, I'm sorry, we're already stepping through our code so that we can perform some logic, so we can decide what to do when we're looking at these nodes and we can actually try and do this deletion. All right, so I will see you then.